Okay, you're not going to introduce me again. Okay, okay. No, 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 no. Stop. So, Marcus made a big mistake. We talked, and I still hadn't finished my presentation. And he said, "You can do whatever you want in the evening." So you guys are stuck with me, and I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and it's about communicating science. And Anna is probably rolling her eyes because she has been through this before.
I'm in
So,
this lecture still, so.
yeah. And actually, communicating science is something that we all have to learn, and we all have to get better at it for a whole variety of different reasons. So I started to run some workshops about communicating science, and I think I've joined a cult. Do you know what a cult is? You know, like a cult film or something like that. It's a small group of very devoted supporters or fans. And I've become a very devoted supporter of communicating science. So I've run 3 leadership workshops and science communication workshops. I teach at Lund University a course on science communication, a week-long course. You should look on the website. It's open to people outside of Lund University too. And there's also, when I teach a PhD course, I have a module in there about science communication. And that's we're going to try and redo tonight. But I'm going to do a shorter version of it. And really what it's about, it's how do you talk to your mom? And it might, I'm not trying to be sexist or anything, because some of you might have mothers that are professors or whatever, but it's how do you talk to the person that changes your car or cuts your hair? How do you talk to somebody about your science and make them interested in it? And it has lots of repercussions. It's also how do you talk to a reporter if you want to talk about your science and get your science out to a wider audience. I've always done some form of science communication. I've always written popular science articles, and these are in Danish and Swedish. I didn't necessarily write all of them in Swedish or Danish. They were translated for me by my colleagues. But I've been very active in getting things out to the popular press. But a few years ago, I published this absolutely fantastic paper in Science. It was a policy forum, and I think it was in 2008. And it's a big deal. People, if you're lucky, you'll have one policy forum in your life. And it was really important. And it also talked a lot about the Baltic Sea and the fact that we needed to do dual nutrient reductions. And I thought, oh, here's my chance. I'm going to do a press release. I'll work with the university office and we'll get it sent out. And I did that, and absolutely nothing happened. I'm waiting by the telephone and no one called me. No one was interested in what I had done. My American colleagues, Hans Pearl, Bob Hallworth, and Don Bosch, and Gene Likens, all have very professional press offices at their universities or their institutes. And they were all over the press in the United States. It was in the New York Times, it was in the Washington Post. And here in Sweden and Europe, no one looked at it. And it turned out that we did a really poor job. I did a poor job about communicating the science. And I came across this book and ended up coming across this person. It's called Escape from the Ivory Tower. The ivory tower is where academics sit, and they don't talk to normal people. And this book is a very excellent book on how you talk to other people and how you present your science. And that's what we'll do today. So I've actually been through these workshops myself. We've been running these leadership and communication workshops. And the woman who wrote the book, Nancy Barron, works for this group called Compass. And they're consultants, but they're publicly, privately supported in the US. And they're just absolutely wonderful. And we've gotten money from a variety of different places, mostly in Sweden. But we've done them for people around the Baltic Sea. And so we've had Danes and Germans and Finns and also some colleagues from the Netherlands. So it wasn't just Swedes. We've now trained 58 scientists over 3 trainings. And it's fantastic because the first time I was there, I was both the leader of the course and I was a student in the course. And I have learned a lot, but I've been back 2 other times just as the leader of the course. And I've learned so much about communicating your science. And it turns out, I think I'm a much better communicator today. I think I'm a better scientist. I think I'm really good at distilling things down to their essence and trying to communicate them to people. So I'm much better than before. And it has to do with this course. And I think that everyone can do this. What's interesting about this course that I took was Christoph Humberg and Tina Nielsen, who's the administrative director of the Baltic Sea Science Center here at Stockholm University. They came up with the idea for the Baltic Eye after the course. They were on the train ride home and came up with this concept that we need to train more scientists to synthesize science and explain that to politicians and to the public so that we can make changes in the Baltic Sea. And I think that was really fascinating that they have this project. And so what I'm going to do is try and teach you how to do this. And I have since done it a number of different times and have been rather successful. This was the paper we did on the coastal hypoxia. I actually was on Swedish television and Swedish radio. I was in the newspapers. I think there were 25 different media outlets. But it was a popular topic and people were interested in it. I did another paper a couple years ago, and this is a comment in Nature, and it's about saving the Baltic Sea. And I prepared the press release, and it was all ready to go, and no one called me. And so I didn't quite get it right, but what happened was when it came out the day that it was published, Christoph Humberg was at this big meeting with a number of important funders around the Baltic. And he started his talk in the morning with, this was the first slide that he had. We shouldn't work on geoengineering. We should continue to reduce nutrients. And it turned out that this was sent to HELCOM, and HELCOM sent it out to all the member states and all the people on their committees. And so it got distributed in a very wide fashion. And I think it made an impact that we wanted to make. The next one, I published this in Nature as well, and it's about gender. I do a lot of stuff on gender equality. And it was the fact that if you go to Nature and you look at things like News and Views, or you go to Science and Perspectives, it's primarily men that are writing the articles. And so we complained about it in this letter. And we ended up having an argument with Nature. It took us 3 months to get this published before they agreed to the language in this. And we sent it out, and again, no one was interested. But it got caught in the blog world. And so it was on Twitter and Facebook. And there were all these different organizations that had contacted us that has gotten this. And so there's different ways that you learn to do this. But I think the cool thing about this one, 3 months after we had published this, because Nature didn't believe how we did our study, they went and did their own study. And they published a paper called Nature's Sexism. And they realized that they were discriminating against women. And so they have promised that they would change that. So we're following what they're doing. After the first year, they had certainly made progress. And this November, it'll be 3 years since they've done this. And so we've been posting things on blogs and stuff and continuing to talk about this. So there's lots of ways to talk about your science and lots of different ways to succeed and to fail. The last story of my own that I'll tell you about is one from last summer. I was invited to the U.S. State Department to talk. It was John Kerry, the Secretary of State. And there were all these politicians and international organizations. There were 300 people invited. I had to go buy my first suit, like matching trousers and matching shirt, since I was in high school. And here I am giving my talk. And it was really spectacular with John Kerry and Leonardo DiCaprio was there. And it was really an incredible experience. But I worked with the Compass Group. How do I talk to these politicians? And what they said, don't use big words. Don't show graphs. No one will understand you. Show pictures. So I made this talk. I was given exactly 6 minutes. I talked in pictures. So I talked about a fisherman I knew on the Baltic that ended up going out of business because he couldn't catch fish, partly due to overfishing, but also due to diseases the fish were getting. And I talked about nutrients and where they're coming from, and showed pictures of agriculture and manure and sewage treatment plants. And they helped me how you can communicate your message to another audience. And I think that's really important. So that's what I'm going to do for you. So if you take one and pass it around, there's one for you too, Johan, so feel free. And this is the message box. I need one for myself, please. And so the message box is just a tool. When we write papers, we have a title, we have an abstract, a background, methods, results, and discussion. This is kind of the same thing that's translated over to what a reporter might want or something else. And we'll go through this, and I'm going to have you fill this out, actually, and that's going to be your job. But it's very much dependent upon the audience. So I would tell my mom something different than I would tell a reporter, that I would tell a politician. So it very much depends on who you talk to. And so tonight we're going to keep it very simple and talk, it's got to be someone that's a layperson, that's not in your field, it's not another scientist. And we're going to fill out this message box. And it has a variety of different things on there. It has, for example, what's the problem? And the problem is there a problem or a decision or a conflict that you have to solve? The second thing is the so what. And the so what is actually one of the most important ones. You always get asked by reporters, why do we care? Why is this important? It's also solutions. Is there something you can do to achieve and go beyond what you were doing, and what are the benefits? Because people are always looking for why should I do this? What's in this for me? So I want you to do this. There's a couple things to remember. The first one is to simplify. I mean, you can't use words like primary production, because no one will know what primary production is, or stratification, or so you have to put it in words that your mom would understand, or your whomever. And you have to, our audience here is the public, so they can't be big words, and you have to avoid different jargon that we use, like major Baltic inflow. I mean, it might mean something to you guys after today, but it probably won't mean much to the general public. When you write this down, you're gonna talk about it. You're gonna go through it orally, and you'll probably have to rewrite it, because you're gonna talk it out loud and it's not gonna sound right, and your partner will help you decide and do it, and you have to be happy with it. You should think of analogies or metaphors, try and relate it to something. I spend my free time now thinking about these things. So one of the ones that I have is take a deep breath. Every fifth breath you take is from diatoms in the ocean. And I study the factors that grow diatoms in the ocean. And there are little things like that can catch people, and then they start asking you questions. And so if you can think of of something. It's like that one we saw today about the oxygen. It takes 20 to 60,000 railroad cars. You know, it's crazy. But you know, you have to put it in something. When you say 2 to 5 million tons of oxygen, it doesn't mean anything to anybody. So how do you translate it into something that they can grab onto? And you can think of catchy phrases. And then what you can do tonight, I'm going to have everyone go through this. And first, what I'm going to have you do is sit down by yourself and think and write down something, two lines in the message box about your research, hopefully. If you're uncomfortable with doing it about your research, do it about your master's thesis or whatever you're working on. The important thing is I want you guys to succeed and learn the process. If you've just started your PhD and you're not sure what the PhD is going to be, then don't do it on that subject if you feel uncomfortable doing it. And then what I'm going to do is after you work on it, then you're going to split up into one-on-one, and you're going to talk it out with a person and then revise it. And then you're going to take that and you're going to turn it into a 1-minute talk about your science. The only thing that I want you to do is when you do it, and you'll do it in front of the class, I want you to say what your name is and where you're from, because I've read most of your abstracts, but I can't place abstracts with who you guys are. So you're doing it for me. So, hi, I'm Daniel, I'm from Lund, or I work on hypoxia or something like that. But then start telling me about your work and take 1 minute to do it. And I'll go around, and if you have questions, or if you have questions that you think everyone would like to answer, raise your hand. I have an example that I can give you. So this was the message box that I used for doing the coastal hypoxia. And it was actually really interesting because if you looked at the first version of it, you know, there was a paragraph there. And you keep cutting it down, you keep cutting it down. And when I started to talk to reporters, I had this in front of me. And I would, because I was on the telephone, they couldn't see me there. And I used it as a crutch. And after I talked about it 3 or 4 or 5 times, I didn't need it anymore. And I could just continue. And some of the statements are really powerful. This one about solutions. When I was on television, you know, they cut and paste your interview. They ask you these questions. And so I was talking about hypoxia. And at the very end, they asked, so what can we do? And I said, politicians have to reduce nutrients now. And then the interview ended. And it was really powerful. And so, you know, these things that you say can really convey a message. So I'm going to start and give you guys 10 minutes and see where you are. If you have questions, raise your hand, and I'll try and answer them. Only two lines, and they don't have to be necessarily complete sentences either, about your own work. It. I want you to, with the person you're working with, I want you to go through it and practice it out loud. And I will give you at the very, very most 20 minutes. So at 9:35 we'll stop and then we'll start hearing from people. Okay? So I want you to state your name and what you work on or where you're from, just so I know who you are. And then I want you to go into it. And the important thing about using the message box, you shouldn't necessarily feel constrained by going from one box to another. You can do what you feel, which feels right for you. Okay? Again, it's just 1 minute description of what you're doing so that someone that's not in your field can understand. So I'm Daniel Conley, and I work on hypoxia, and I am from Lund University. And the first thing I want all of you to do is to hold your breath. Just hold your breath for a moment while I'm talking here. I'm going to talk about dead zones because dead zones are spreading throughout the world. And what it means is that there's a lack of oxygen in the bottom waters. And it does a couple things. It kills the fish and also causes algal blooms. You guys aren't breathing, are you? Remember, hold your breath. It's the same thing that fish are experiencing at the bottom. And having oxygen in the system is really important because it means we have a healthy, functioning ecosystem. And what's interesting about the research that I'm doing is this is new. We never knew this before. We knew there was hypoxia in the Baltic Sea, but we had no idea that it was so widespread in the coastal zone. But we can fix this, but the politicians have to act now to reduce nutrients. Okay?